Well, for more on the role that social media played in fueling yesterday's riots, I'm joined by Steve Kovac. He's a technology reporter for CNBC.com. And Joanna Stern, a senior personal technology reporter at the Wall Street Journal and a CNBC contributor. Steve, one of the things on my mind as we watch this all play out is that social media has also been a place for people to air their grievances that they feel like they have nowhere else to air, or they're frustrated with the mainstream media, or you name it. If they now feel like that's an unwelcome forum, are those grievances going to be channeled elsewhere, or do we think that they're somehow going to go away?
I don't think they're going to be channeled elsewhere. We've seen so many attempts to create alternatives to Facebook and Twitter for these kind of people who feel like they're being censored on these major platforms. Parler is still a small player. We've seen Gab try and fail to become the Twitter for the alt-right. They never work out, and that's because these platforms have gotten so large, there's nowhere else to go. Right now, it almost feels like we're lost because we're not seeing the president tweet about anything happening, and that's been the way he directly communicates with people. And what really struck me was, for years, we've been wondering, what is the moment, this fire alarm that they're going to pull that finally triggers them to suspend his account and keep him from posting? And it wasn't nuclear war. It wasn't threats of violence against the George Floyd protesters. It was people storming the Capitol. We saw real-world implications of his actions and his statements on Twitter and on Facebook, and that's why they had to pull the plug on him.
Joanna, do you think that the fact that Twitter shares are selling off more than 3% today is related to this issue, that the president was a big driver of traffic and engagement?
I think so. I mean, I think there's going to be a real question of what kind of growth or what kind of community did Trump really have on Twitter, and what kind of growth did that drive for the company? We really look at Twitter, and I've said this over the years, his superpower on Twitter isn't necessarily using Twitter to engage. It's to get the message out there. It's as the megaphone, and then getting that out, and the media and others amplifying that. So I think Trump not being on Twitter, is it going to change Twitter? Sure. Is it going to change it as a company? No. But it really was just his megaphone. And so I don't want to diminish its role, but I don't know if it really could damage the company in such a severe way if he's not there.
Steve, what about the issue that Chamath raised around Section 230 and, sort of the way that companies are able to or choose to police content?
Yeah, and I largely agree with what Chamath said. These companies have not realized that they are a publisher. Just like you and I, we have a responsibility to tell the truth to our audiences. They have the responsibility, with so many people turning to these platforms for news and information, to make sure the news and information they get in front of them is true and accurate, and they just failed at that. And so many of these things, these conspiracies that were promoted by the president, start on the dark corners of the internet and kind of filter up from the dark corners to Twitter, to Reddit, to Facebook. And before you know it, the mainstream media is covering it, especially conservative media. And that's where the president sees it. And it just becomes this positive feedback loop that everyone feeds on. And this is where we are. People believe it. People believed it enough. They believed the election was stolen enough because they have this pumped in front of them constantly, that without any indication from Twitter or Facebook that it's false, we saw what happened yesterday.
I'm going to just jump in
really
here to
sad.
say, and I think what we saw yesterday was just the failure of the tools to work. Yeah, I just wanted to say, yesterday we saw the failure of the other tools, the guardrails that Twitter and Facebook had been putting in place, the policies, these little labels that have been on things. What do they read? These results, election results have been disputed. These small things which weren't doing enough, which weren't blocking enough. And so yesterday's actions really show, the companies don't have their hands tied behind their backs. They don't just have to abide by small policies. They do have some power here to really restrict what's published.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.